Welcome everybody to the first webinar in a series that we'll be hosting here at Safe 365. Today's webinar is on the true cost of harm. The moral argument is not enough with Crystal Danbury, who is joining us today. I'm not going to spend too much time up front with an introduction to us, but for those of you who are unaware, Safety provides software to support leaders like yourselves in measuring their safety culture and demonstrating the impact of continual improvement in that space. The topic of the webinar today is really poignant in that context, in terms of actually how do you use both what Safe 365 can deliver, but also other commercial information and data from within the business to actually change the narrative on investment in health and safety, providing a much more commercial argument to your board and to executives, and taking it beyond just that statement of we should do this, to actually prove the potential impact and ROI that it can provide to the business. Crystal comes to us with 20 years of experience in the health and safety industry, spanning a myriad of industries from nuclear, rail, logistics, transport, and her current position in retail. So over to you, Crystal.
Amazing. Thank you, Kirsty. And what a great intro. Talk about bookending the presentation and really grabbing those sort of salient points. So thank you for sort of bringing that to life for the audience. So as Kirsty said, this is about how we evolve our argument, how we evolve us wanting that investment from boards. How do we get the engagement over and above the you should, there's prison, there's fines, etc. Like, how do we get better at creating this sort of this sort of commercial element? How do we reframe ourselves as game changers, commercial game changers? And so I'll start with this question, which is, why do we have to fight so hard for engagement? And it starts right back at the very beginning of my career, where I used to bang my head against a brick wall and ask, why is this so difficult? Why, when I talk to leadership, do they not just get we should be doing this stuff? And through the last 22 years of working in safety across 6 industries, I learned and picked up some things around actually, I'm not framing myself in the best way to get what I need to make this workplace a safer place to be. So let me take you on that journey. So intro, I think Kirsty's basically done it. So I am a mum, I'm a fellow member of CFIOSH, 22 years experience across nuclear, rail, logistics, transport, telecoms, and most recently retail. Work at director level across some FTSEs. I'm also very proudly a non-exec director of Safe 365. Genuinely believe that they are the game changer that our profession needs. And I'm a board director and governor at a prep school in Buckinghamshire, because I just love the idea of safety being right at the heart of where our children are growing. So that's sort of me and all the things that I do with my time. Purpose overall is to make the world a safer place to work. I hate the idea that there are different parts of the world that operate with different levels of safety, and I really want to influence that. And then sort of the objective, how do I want to do that? How do I want to operate? Is to make it as simple as possible to be as safe as possible. Highly complex for the sake of highly complex is not my thing. Promises of zero harm are not my thing. But how do we make it as simple as possible to be from where we are to safer? And how do we make it as safe as we humanly possibly can? So they are like my MOs. That's what sits in my core day to day. So, as mentioned, banging head against brick wall. I'll take you back to 2008. I had left the rail industry for a little while to go and look after Northwest Europe for a logistics company, and I've been brought back in. And one of the things that I asked for in my remit was emergency planning. Now, in the nuclear industry, I had trained as a first responder, done the Bucks Fire and Rescue full training, smoke-filled cabins, those sorts of things. I knew what great drilling, stress testing of your emergency procedures looked like. And I knew that the rail industry as a whole, including my organisation, were not doing that. So one of the things I did when I went back in is I wrote myself a paper. I'd done lots and lots of research. I knew that the industry was overdue a catastrophic event. And that was talking to the regulators, the industry bodies, different top train operating companies. we all knew that we were overdue. So I was like, okay, something is going to happen. And we're not testing, we're doing sort of tabletop exercises, but they weren't even really high quality ones. So I wrote my paper. I said we were overdue for an event. I said that we should be taking care and we should be looking at our processes and we should be stress testing. And that the most likely event based on our geography was a collision with a person or a vehicle on a level crossing. So I knew exactly what we needed to exercise. And the scenario needed to be a level crossing incident. And it fell on deaf ears. And the question I asked myself was, do they even care? How could I be saying we're overdue this incident, people will be hurt, and it just fell on deaf ears? They can't care. So in that room, what I did is I lobbied massively to say this is the really important thing to do. We really should be doing this. And I kind of got a pat on the head and I got sent away with £1,000. And I thought, irrelevant of the budget that they didn't give me, I have to run this event because I know it has to happen. I know this is how we're going to take care of our communities, our people, our drivers. We need to stress test our arrangements. And if any of you see me over a beer, ask me for the full story, but I essentially went around and literally doorstepped every single fire station, police station, AMBO service, even a theatrical college. And basically, for my full £1,000, ran a full blues and twos, car on the track, actors in the train, exercise. And I used my £1,000 to pay my train driver to bring my train in and then take it out again. So I ran that exercise. The most incredible thing happened 3/4 of the way through this planning. Other train operating companies, regulators, Network Rail, the police, they all started to think about what they could probably get from the fact that we were conducting this exercise. And on the day, there was a bridge over the siding where we held this exercise, and it was full, absolutely full, with senior leaders and spectators from train operating companies and regulators looking at what could come from the first ever line-side live exercise. And the learnings were phenomenal. We learned our contracts were not clear in terms of what on-call meant, in terms of like vicinity to the organisation, single points of failure, people not picking up the phone, training that didn't quite work. We learned so much from this event that when I pulled together the findings and sent it back into board for that second conversation, everyone was elated. They got it. They understood the benefit. So I was sat with this question again, and it can't have been that they didn't care. It cannot have been, because once they saw the benefit over and above the you should, they absolutely got it. And actually what happened from then is we were awarded a £10,000 a year budget to conduct exercises and test our arrangements. So it wasn't that they didn't care. It was how I communicated the need and the benefit. So what did I do? At that point, I sat back and thought, I've got this wrong then. They do care. So what did I notice in the room? I noticed the glaze over. So the safety paper comes out, the glaze comes, right? What came before that was a massive report, huge spreadsheets, lots of data, and I essentially told them with red or green arrows what they should be happy about and what they shouldn't be happy about, and then told them my plans to fix the things they weren't happy about. So there was the glaze. There was no common language. I'm talking in acronyms, I'm talking in jargon, they're talking in commerciality, viability, ROI, return on investment. No common language between our two places at all. I also noticed a detached mindset, which was, I've brought you here to do this, this is your problem. And we all know that you cannot delegate safety, but there was this really distinct feeling of, but that's not me, that's you. And I think that becomes from, and we'll go into this a little bit later on in the presentation, this feeling of compliance. You're here to make sure that we're not breaking any rules. So that's your responsibility. So it's detached mindset. That's your job. It's delegated. But the most incredible thing that I noticed in that room is nobody was inspiring anybody to do anything different or better. I was not inspiring the board to challenge themselves to do something better with the way I was communicating, but they were also not inspiring me to create a better argument, to improve safety, to do anything different. They were looking at that board pack of safety stats, taking in the basics of what they needed to take in and moving on. There's no inspiration. So the question for me then, and that was a very long time ago, that's 2008, was what needed to change? How do I change that dynamic? And it sort of goes over 5 rungs for me. One of them was the language that I mentioned, discussing jargon, acronyms, those sorts of things, a complete jar in communication between 2 audiences, between the presenter and the audience, right? So the language has to change. The jargon has to go, right? And one of the really, really, really crucial things that I did is I swapped, and I have done this now for 15 years. I've swapped safety, because it has this connotation of compliance, with the word care, because we have different conversations, right? Where I say, how do we keep people safe? And there's that feeling of like, that's the safety team. Where the conversation about, are we taking care of our people? What are all of our roles to play in taking care of our communities, even in a sustainability place, taking care of our environment, taking care of our customers? Taking care is everybody's responsibility. So swapping that out to have an emotive conversation, a human conversation that isn't jargon related, isn't attached to law in any way, right? Although there is the duty of care, but care. It's a different conversation. And it also switched accidents for harm. And this does a couple of things. One, really gets rid of the dirty washing when everyone's like, is it health? Is it safety? Is it well-being? Harm, we can be harming people's bodies and their minds. And that can be from a health perspective, from an accident perspective, from an erosion of their wellness, right? So harm. And the really cool thing about harm is you can have a better conversation. How are we harming people at this location? Like most commonly, typically, what are our top types of harm? Where are we harming people? Harm is very different to where are we having slips, trips and falls. All of that data crunch 100% happens in the depth of your team, your safety team, but in communicating with people that are not in your team, talking about how we harm people, everybody can relax because we know how to have that conversation. We know about harm. And with those 2 things in mind, I swapped out the massive spreadsheets and data sets at board level. Now, I am a data beast. I love to understand my root causes, my trends. I love to understand where something's happening and why. But if I want a really good conversation at board level, I want to maximize that slot that I get given, I want to be able to talk about really, really juicy, meaty moments that stay with the board. So I wipe the slate and I talk about 6 things only. I talk about fatalities, obviously, when that happens, that needs to have a good conversation. LCIs and MRIs, so these are metrics of my own making, but bear with me. An LCI, a life-changing injury that permanently changes the mobility ability or cognitive ability of an individual, right? So mobility ability of an individual. Where did we change somebody's life forever, or their body forever? MRI, major recoverable injury. This is a high trauma event, snap leg, right? That you will recover from physically, but the trauma will stay with you. It was a big event. The reason I love this is we're talking about, and we sort of capture all the riddles and all those sorts of things in this MRA space. I hate the riddle thing, metric ever going to board. Why do they need to know how many times we talk to a regulator? But they do want to know how many times we change somebody's life. And in going down the MRI route, we start to also acknowledge trauma. Like Barry will be back in 6 weeks' time because his leg will be healed. That was a trauma event. How do we take care of Barry coming back into the workplace? What does that look like? Because it was a high trauma event. So major recoverable, LCI, fatality, apex injuries. Now, how you know these work is if I go back 9 years, I walked into a boardroom after introducing these at a large organisation. And a question before I got in the room was, I kind of can't wait, Crystal, I need to understand if we've changed anybody's life this month. Like, did we? Now, I was able to say no, which was fantastic. But that emotive conversation wasn't, did the riddles go up or down this month? Right? It wasn't a jargon-based conversation. It was, did we as an organisation change a life? It was a better start of a conversation. And actually, in leaving the same boardroom some months later, I had one of the board members tap me on the shoulder and say, I can't believe it, even in this year, in this era, we're still changing people's lives. That's the feeling that we want them to live with. We can have a much smaller conversation about a much smaller number of events that are really, really impactful. We can deal with the rest of it underneath. But if you want to engage with a board, talk about fewer, more impactful things. And then under that, I always do lost time injury, a bit of an ode to the business. It's nice to be able to demonstrate how we're giving the time back, and also to wipe everything that a board is used to and give them nothing they recognise is also very jarring. So LTI we do in there. And then it's near miss reporting, near misses and hazards. So I do those. That's it. Great, fruitful conversations. And that brings me down to my next bit, reducing the size of those reports, getting rid of the glaze, because it's a good conversation. There's not too much to suck and take in from a board level when they've had a massive day. There is some empathy going to and from, and we can have some really good specific conversations. If we have had an LCI, whose life did we change? How? What did we learn? Fantastic. Really zeroing in on impact. Then arrogance. One of the most interesting things when I've given this presentation before, I can feel people itch in the room, and I've had people shake their heads even. This comes from Stuart Hughes, who did a fantastic blog on the arrogance of safety. We're the only profession that walk into a boardroom, as I did, and say, you should, we must, you have to. We're the only people that don't talk like everybody else that goes into a boardroom. Everybody else has to create a return on investment, understand the commerciality of what they're asking for, and be able to demonstrate its benefit. And we as a profession can walk into a room and say, you should. So it's reducing that, really growing some empathy and thinking, how can I be the game changer here? How can I communicate in a different way? And the last two rungs really play into that piece. How do I create a better argument? Understanding what safety costs is number one, because this is your empathy with your board. This is your lock-in. What does your team cost? What do your systems cost? What do your processes already cost? Because it's so easy to look at an organisation that you're in and go, they never invest, they're not doing it. But have we paid an appreciation to what they already invest? The minute you do that, and the minute you start thinking about your current impact in labour through process, like the controls that you maybe don't even need, the training that's bigger than it should be, all of that stuff. The minute you start thinking about what you already cost, it brings a real responsibility on you to say, if I'm making it as simple as possible to be as safe as possible, what could I or would I remove to create real simplicity in getting from here to safer, right? So understanding what we already cost. And when you start digging into that, it's really epic proportions that we already have as a level of investment, and paying ode to that, giving it back where we don't need it anymore. You start to create this real feeling of, I understand the commerciality of this organisation. I understand how I can give back. I understand how I can play in this ball pit with you and be really conscious of my impact. And I'm not going to ask you or keep anything that I don't need. And that's quite a scary thing to get involved in, but it is the game changer, I promise you. And then that last level, understanding the true cost of harm. So take these just as complete examples, right? Our apex injuries we've already mentioned. LCIs, MRIs, fatalities, they cost. They cost emotionally, they cost families. Of course they do. That's the moral argument. It's why we work in the profession that we work in. But if we're going to demonstrate to an organisation, to a board, to an executive, where every single member of that board is there because they care passionately about their bit. How do we create the connection? Well, what you can do is you can look at your apex injuries. You can look at the levels of absence caused, the time lost to investigation, the insurance premiums, the deductibles, the civil claims, the third party costs, the whatever is attached to those. And not only is it a devastating event, but in also being able to say, we understand the root causes and we needed some investment to fix the problem. If you can demonstrate what those things cost us, we found a trend, these things cost us this much, and the level of investment we need is here. We've got an ROI here that can reduce our apex injuries, so we're doing right by people, but also our commercial impact is absolutely lessened because what we're going to ask you for over here pays back here, right? So apex injuries, harm in the round, right? All your different types of accidents that you're going to look at in the other layers of your team, every single one of them creates cost, whether it's through the accident investigation process, whether it's through claims, absence, overtime, agency, bent metal, property damage, you name it. Harm overall costs people and costs the business. So imagine if you dig into your trends, if you're a data person like me, and I really like to understand where the commonalities are, where have we got one root cause in 50 locations and where can we rip it out? Well, that holistic rip out costs money. But if I can articulate the level of loss from that hazard being in play over the last strategy period, 1, 2, 3 years, however your organization works, suddenly, usually that investment pales into insignificance quickly. And it's a no-brainer. It's a, of course, Crystal, understand the impact, understand the investment, understand the ROI. And we're doing something great. Easy conversation. And then you can come down all of this list and you can look at the other things that we pay for, the EAP services, absence, as I've mentioned, repair costs, claims, brand damage, all those sorts of things. A really great example in this is bent metal. So lots and lots of people are coming to me at the moment talking about making great cases to work with organisations on getting telematics in vehicles where we have like large fleets. And it's expensive. If you want good quality telematics, typically those that are sort of also overcoming the barriers through GDPR, so they work on AI and facial recognition as opposed to recording, that sort of stuff, it's an investment. If you're going to a board for that investment and said, this is X, we're having this many accidents over here, and we want this level of investment from your bottom line, thank you very much. That's a difficult thing to sell when the feeling might be that we're all right. Nothing like, we've seen this trend, or maybe your trend for RTA is flat even. So where do you create the argument? I tell you where. Is go and look at what it's costing you to repair your vehicles, replace your vehicles, write-offs, driver loss, agency cover, all those sorts of things. Absolutely articulate the level of loss in the RTA space, and then put next to that cost. So over the next 3 years, this is what RTA will cost you if we stay as we are. This level of investment in technology, and here are some statistics of other organisations that have done it, will reduce our RTAs by approximately X%. Your ROI window, your return on investment is 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, something. It's a different conversation because you can start with this level of loss to our people, this level of injury is costing our people, but it's costing you. You're suddenly creating the connection, right? Moral is the absolute way to go. And let me demonstrate how that pays dividends to our organisations and make sure we're still paying everyone's wages and they're still paying their bills, right? Because that's actually what an organisation is there to do. It's employing people. It's a community. We need to up our game. We can't be arrogant and use you'll go to prison, even if that's, articulate it if it's the right thing and it's real. But I much prefer to say we are hurting this many people, we're damaging this many things, it's costing us this. I'd love to change the game. I need this level of investment to change that game. And actually, I'm going to give that investment back to you in X months, years. and we would have done something fantastic. Again, an easier conversation. And that's not to say that all those conversations are yeses. Of course not. But it's absolutely a different conversation. And where I've seen this start to pay dividends at the moment is working with incredible leaders approaching, say, 365. And they also have another model called Orgwell 365, which is a wellbeing model. And we're having leaders talk about, how do I really understand the benefit of these incredible tools. It costs X amount to implement them. How do I create this real feeling of benefit to the organization? I know what it can do. Morally, I know it's the absolute right thing to do. We can see that the models bring harm down, but how do I make this better conversation? And we're sharing the true cost of harm with those leaders, and they're creating these arguments. It's phenomenal unlocker. And the really interesting thing about this is you could do a case study across your organization looking at all of these types and more. And then if you are super duper brave, you would times that cost by your margin and let the organization know what they had to make to pay for harm at its current level. I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to overcome. We feel like everybody is comfortable when we're not. Everybody's comfortable with the current level of safety or the current level of culture. But we as leaders know that we need to push forward. And even if we have plateaued or we're seeing really gentle declines, we know that we can do more. The minute you start to frame the true cost of harm as a impact across the piece, or even in your sections, even in that logistics space, maybe, or the transport space with your RTAs, you're creating really game-changing conversations. This is what it costs you currently at your level. Are we still comfortable with this level of impact? Now we understand the true cost of harm. And if we put our margin on it, we had to make 96 times this amount of money just to pay for the true cost of harm at the moment. It changes the conversation. It is really powerful. So the biggest mindset shifts for me over that 15-year period have definitely been understanding and having empathy with what the organisation already give me, and understanding where I should give back, whether it's removing complexity, whether it's the labour saving through removing process that doesn't work, dropping training or controls that really don't work or manager control. Understanding and having empathy for what an organisation already give me has been a real game changer for creating this two-way, right? My appreciation of what I already have. Humanising the language. Are we changing anybody's life? How are we taking care of people, right? How are we harming people? Where are we harming people the most? Humanising the language. There's nothing about compliance in there. There's nothing about safety, nothing about blame or accidents. How are we taking care of people? How are we harming people? Let's change those things. And then understanding the true cost of harm. Real game changers for me. And I've been operating in that mindset for at least a decade, if not 15 years. And it is really creating difference. I hope that is super helpful. And I land on this point that we don't have to fight. We just have to evolve our argument. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that has been really helpful. And thank you for joining me.